So far then, we've seen how to take this single root app component and render it to the DOM. So if we wanted to, we could create an entire web page template inside this root component, and we could have our component object right here control any data or functionality of the whole template, and then we'd have our styles at the bottom to style it all as well. But if you're making a whole web page template inside one single component, then that will soon get to be a very large, hard to read, gigantic mess. We might have a lot of HTML for things like a header, a menu, a sidebar, some articles, some images, and a footer. And the component object right here controlling that HTML template might get big and unreadable too, with tons of methods, data properties, etc. And the same goes for the styles at the bottom. So it's not a good idea to put everything inside one single component or one single view file. Instead, what we should do is split our code up into different view components. For example, we might have a component for the navbar and the header. We might have a sidebar component for the sidebar templates. We could have an article component for an article we show, and we might have a footer component for the footer. Now this makes each component much more readable and easier to maintain, and it also makes our project code much more modular and reusable, because you can reuse components in multiple places in your website, and we'll see how to do all of that later as well. So in our Vue app so far, we have one component, the app.view component, and this is known as the root component. Now, every Vue app that you create will always have a root component. Now, you can call it what you want, but when you create a new Vue app using the Vue CLI, it will always be called app.view. Now, this is the component that sits at the top of the application structure, and it's the component that's initially mounted to the DOM. Now, ultimately, all other components we make will be nested inside this root component. So, for example, we might have a header component, an article component, and a footer component. So all of these three components represent a different part of the web page, and they are all nested individually in the root component. Now, inside those components, you might also have other components nested. For example, inside the article component, you might have a content component and a comments component as well. So this is how we structure our Vue applications. Now, I also want to go over a bit of terminology. When we structure our components like this and we nest components in other components, we call these ones child components and the component that they're nested in the parent component. And that makes sense, right? Same for this up here. The app would be the parent component of these child components. And also, this whole structure of components nested in each other that together make up a web page is called a component tree. Now, you'll probably use these types of diagrams a lot when you're planning how to structure your website with something like Vue, and we'll be using them for projects in this course later on. To begin with, we'll be keeping it simple and just creating one subcomponent that we can nest inside the root component, and that is going to be for a modal. Now, first of all, we can see that when we created this starter app with the Vue CLI, it automatically generated this components folder. And inside that, we have a component called Hello World that the Vue CLI generated as well. Now, if we take a look at this, it looks very much like the app.view folder in that it has a template, which is significantly bigger, but it also has a script with an object inside it, and we have styles at the bottom. Now, I'm actually going to delete this file because I don't need it, and instead I'm going to create a new file inside the components folder called modal with a capital M, and this is a naming convention that I like to use whenever I'm creating a new Vue component. I start it with a capital letter. You don't have to, that's just my convention, but you can call it whatever you want, but it must have the .vue extension. And by the way, we don't have to put this inside the components folder either if we don't want to. That's just another convention. But you can place it anywhere inside the source folder if you prefer. But I'm going to leave it here for now, and I will talk a little bit more about folder structure later on. So inside this component, I want to create a modal or a pop-up which we can show in the browser. Now, to do this, we're going to need a template and also some styles, but at the minute we don't technically need a script tag. We might use that later if we have some data or if we have some methods we want to use in here, but for now we don't need it. So let's first just do the template, and then inside that template, we'll create the HTML for this modal. Now it's just going to be a div, and it's going to have a class equal to backdrop first of all, and this is going to be the backdrop behind the modal. So you know when you have a modal popped up on your screen, it fades the background out. That's what this backdrop is going to be. We're going to make this kind of like a semi-transparent dark grey or black, and that's going to go behind the modal itself. Now inside that, I'm going to create a div with a class of modal, and this is the actual modal pop-up itself that appears on top of the backdrop. And inside that modal, we need some kind of content, so we'll do a paragraph tag for that, and we'll just say modal content right here. Okay, so that's our template, dead simple. Now I'm also going to create a style tag, and this is just to style these different elements. And I'm going to paste these in because I don't want to bore you with writing out CSS, but I will go through them. So we target the modal right here first of all, and we're giving this a width of 400 pixels, a bit of padding, margin top and bottom, left and right auto, so it's centrally aligned in the middle of the page. The background of the modal is white, and it's got a border radius to soften the corners. Now the backdrop is positioned fixed, and from the top is 0 pixels, so it starts at the top and it's fixed on the page, so it's always there. The background, we use RGBA and color it black. The alpha channel right here controls the transparency, and we're saying it's 0.5, so that's semi-transparent. And then the width is 100% of the browser, and the height is 100% of the browser as well. So that is our modal component right there. Now we want to be able to use this modal component inside our app component. So how do we do this? Well, it's pretty simple. There's a couple of different steps. First, we have to import this modal component inside the script. So you know, like we saw the Hello World component being imported before, we're going to do the same thing this time for the modal. So I'm going to say import and then modal from, and it's going to be ./components/modal. So this right here, you can call what you want because we don't explicitly name the export, but this right here has to be the file name. And in fact, I'm going to say .view right here. You don't need to add .view, but I always generally do. All right, so we're importing this right now, and now we want to use it inside this component. So we have to register that we want to use this modal component inside this component, and the way we do that is inside this object right here. So I can come down here and say components as a property, which is an object, and inside here I can say modal like that, and that's all I need to do. Whatever you call it here, we can name a property right here. So if I want to use that in the template, I can just say modal like so, like an HTML tag, but this won't work unless I first import it and then register it inside the component. All right, so there's 2 steps before we use it, and then we nest it as if it was just another HTML tag. So if I take a look at this, all of this template now will be placed right here inside this component, so underneath the H1. So let's save that and preview this in the browser, and we can see it right there. So now we've created this component, we can use it in whatever other component that we want to, and we could use it multiple times if we wanted to. I could do 2. I'm not going to do that because that's a bit daft, but I could do if I wanted to. So it makes all of this code really reusable. Now, just a couple of things about naming your components. If you don't start them with a capital letter, make sure that you do not name them the same as a regular HTML tag like footer or header or nav, because that will cause a conflict when you try to output them in the template, because the tag will represent both your component and a regular HTML tag that already exists. However, if they start with a capital over here, then there will be no conflict.